of Pakistan. This is a threat that had tremendous relevance to many nations.
Indeed, Andrea Mitchell, covering the diplomatic end of this. This was a worldwide fight, and the intelligence that was gathered and relied upon around the world from the Saudis and others in the Arab world was incredibly important, but it didn't change the fact that this remained a figure who was isolated and protected.
And, of course, the huge tensions between American and Pakistani intelligence over this, over their failure to help and the lack of trust, which we saw most notably in the recent arrest for 3 months of Raymond Davis, a CIA contractor or operative, the fact that there were so many tensions with the Pakistanis, close relationships, of course, with the Saudis and others in the region, and also British intelligence, German intelligence, French, the Italians, throughout the region and in Europe. Very close working relationships now that had not existed really prior to 9/11. So the 9/11 Commission's report, David, and a lot of the flaws that were found were corrected after the fact. And this will be a huge boost to all of them.
I want to turn it over to my colleague Brian Williams in New York to pick up our coverage from here. And Brian, we await the president, as you've heard our reporting up until now.
David, a few moments ago, I heard an analyst on the radio catch herself after saying this is the biggest piece of news since 9/11. And as you've been saying in our coverage, this ends an era, not only the mastermind of 9/11, but the inventor of al-Qaeda, the founder of that organization, which is today markedly different and splintered, and if anything, covers more real estate around the world, and some would tell you is of greater danger in its kind of retail nature, but has changed significantly since the Pentagon was attacked, since the buildings were brought down in Lower Manhattan, and of course the plane in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Our chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel following this news, as will the rest of the world when the president makes the announcement official. Again, for those just joining us, the White House made a series of notifications, journalists among them, that a big story was coming tonight. Some were told the news explicitly, and in the White House parlance were told to keep it as a close hold. This story started to leak out in the public domain, largely when some congressional staffers started making some phone calls on their own. Richard, the U.S. undoubtedly will be worried about threat levels and readiness levels at all U.S. installations and bases overseas. Tell us the various ways this news will cut around the world.
We were one of those people who got this information about an hour ago, and I think threat levels around the world will, in the short term, be very high. Al-Qaeda will certainly try and say that it is still relevant, it is still in the game, but over the long term, this is an incredibly significant blow. Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, particularly Osama bin Laden, has been the symbol of the resistance movement against the United States, against its project to bring democracy to the Middle East for the last decade. And now with the word that not only has he been killed, but the United States has his body. And that, I think, will be the key thing in all of this, that the United States, the Special Operations Forces, and congratulations to them this evening, was able not only to reach out into Pakistan, into the tribal areas where we're assuming this incident took place, and to not only kill Osama bin Laden, but to retrieve his body. That will be an incredibly significant moral blow to the militants, and will show that the United States wasn't kidding when it launched this war on terrorism. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a myth that the United States did have the power to carry out an effective operation on the ground. And that is what so many people were doubting after the war in Iraq, after the war in Afghanistan, after the war in Afghanistan was renewed again. People were worried that the United States didn't have the capability and that it was simply a myth. And I think after they produce a body and say, this is what we have accomplished.
Miso, take him over here.
we have accomplished. Many people in the Arab world in particular will be very impressed.
And Richard, while I have you, before we go back to David Gregory in Washington for a bit, because of the burden of proof, especially in the Arab world, given the vagaries there, the need for proof, the need for DNA, point out for a moment, if you will, the DNA testing that's been going on for the better part of a decade.
Oh, this is going to have to be very, very clear in the Arab world. They're going to have to show his face. They're going to have to show his body. They're going to not just take it on DNA testing. The United States can't show a vial of blood and say this is Osama bin Laden. The Arab world will want to see something that looks like Osama bin Laden with an American soldier standing next to him. The burden of proof is very, very high, Brian.
Richard Engel, our chief foreign correspondent, up following this news and awaiting the president's announcement, as are we. It was originally posted for 10:30 Eastern time, about 45 minutes ago. It has slid. The president, all we were told earlier was that he was on the telephone notifying, remember, all the number of congressional committees. And David Gregory, the leadership, of course, needs to be told. Leon Panetta was making some of those calls, the defense secretary designate, a longtime CIA leader. And, of course, all the various intelligence, defense, and related committees, both sides of the aisle, all need to be informed.
And they have been informed. The vice president involved in that, the CIA director, of course, the president himself, as you can imagine, Brian, has been working on these remarks throughout the day as they've been monitoring events coming out of Pakistan. I think it bears repeating. The question you asked was so important to Richard Engel.